Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Alisha and today I'm going to be doing my August reading wrap-up. So I read about 14 books in August. It's not technically the end of August yet, so I might be able to squeeze in a couple more books, but I'm just going to be talking about the 14 that I have finished at this very moment. So a pretty good reading month for me, even though I have felt really out of it reading this month, and I feel like this has been going around, like everybody's been in a bit of a reading slump, but I feel like I've started so many books and I just haven't been able to finish a lot of them. And I don't know if it's just like I'm picking books that I'm getting bored of easily, or that I just am not like in the mood to read, or I don't know, just the content of the books themselves. But I still somehow managed to finish 14 books, so pretty crazy. Don't know how I did that, but here are the books and let's get talking about them. So starting off the month, I read a few romance books. First off being The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. So this is, I've read quite a few Christina Lauren books and I haven't really like loved any of them, but this book especially I didn't like. I think I gave this book 2 stars, maybe 2.5. And I think the concept was really cool. Basically this is about a kind of new dating algorithm type thing, which is this guy has created and made into an app that is like a dating app, but it kind of takes your DNA and matches you with another DNA that's like, you know, really high match. And so this girl ends up kind of I guess by accident or by like chance having her DNA put into this app, and she gets matched with the creator of the app, and they have like a 99% match, which is like really high and crazy and doesn't ever happen. And so, you know, they kind of, for the company, she is asked to pretend to date the guy, and it ends up being this fake dating trope, and you know what comes from that. So I don't know, I think again, like I think the concept was really cool. I love the idea of like how science and you know, DNA and things like that, and how that can, you know, you can find your soulmate or get a match through that. But I just think the characters were not fleshed out. I think the chemistry wasn't there, and honestly like both characters were really forgettable. I don't remember their names, I don't remember anything about them, and yeah, wouldn't recommend this book to be honest. And it's kind of bad because I think this is a really popular book and a lot of people do like it, but I don't know, for some reason I've been reading a lot of romance books and a lot of popular ones I just don't like, and like I feel like I don't know if I'm missing something because so many people like them, and a lot of times it's like the characters aren't good or the chemistry isn't there that I, you know, see. So I don't know, we're still trying to figure out what I like in romance books, I guess. The next up though was a romance book that I really liked, and that was The Bride Test by Helen Wong. So this is the second book in a series, the first being The Kiss Quotient, and I absolutely loved The Kiss Quotient. It was such a kind of breath of fresh air in this genre. I think it was written so well, the characters were so lovable, and the chemistry was there. And I hadn't actually heard a lot about the second book, so I don't know if that was because people didn't really like it as much or it just wasn't popular for some reason. But I really love this book. I think I might even like it more than the first book, and it was just so cute. I think another thing that I love about these books is the representation in them. So the main characters so far have both had are somewhere on the autism spectrum, and I feel like that representation is just so real and organic, and that is actually because Helen Wong has in her author's notes said that she is on the ASD spectrum, she basically is on the autism spectrum, and so she's obviously writing from a place of her own experiences, and I feel like you can really tell that in these books. But aside from that, I mean, it's also, I think the characters are Vietnamese, so yeah, a lot of representation, but also just, you know, besides that, the writing is so great and the characters are so great and the chemistry is. So next I have a book that came out in 2021, and I haven't heard anything really about this book, and I have no idea actually how I saw it or why it was on my radar, but I just decided to pick it up one day, and that is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. And so this was a really fascinating and weird book, and I don't really know how to feel about it. I remember while reading it, it felt like it was, I don't even know how to classify this, to be honest, but it just felt like it was talking about something that was really interesting and done in an interesting way. Although I did feel that a lot of parts of the book ended up being kind of boring and kind of like one note. So I don't know if that was the writing or just the way that the book was written in terms of like the flow of it, but it wasn't my favorite, but it was still fascinating. So I would say, you know, read it at your own risk, I guess. But basically what this is about is it's a girl named Gilda who is like kind of obsessed with death, and she has really morbid thoughts and is a bit weird. And one day she sees a flyer for free therapy at her local church. So she shows up at the church, and the father of the church kind of mistakes her for applying for a job there, and so kind of on the spot gives her a job as a receptionist at the church. The problem, however, is that she is not a Catholic, she is a lesbian, and so she very much feels alienated from the church, and she kind of she feels like she has to hide her identity because you know, then she won't have a job, and she also needs a job and needs money. But this also, so basically when she starts working at the church, she realizes that she has taken the job of someone who has recently died, and they died from like kind of mysterious circumstances. So parts of this book are a kind of murder mystery, like we're trying to figure out what happened to that woman who had passed away. But the way that we're given it is we're kind of going just through, we're like just solely in Gilda's head. And so we're only seeing her thoughts and her feelings, and given that she is such a weird character, you know, like she just has these really weird and morbid thoughts, and they're just always circulating in her head. I don't, like, you don't really get much of anything else, I guess, so it kind of makes everything kind of tunnel vision in the book, because again, like, you're only getting Gilda's thoughts, and her thoughts are kind of always spiraling in like a not healthy way. But this book definitely deals with a lot of very hard-hitting topics. Like, I think they're like, definitely look at the trigger warnings for this book before reading it, but it definitely talks about depression and self-harm, suicide, you know, things like that, homophobia, all of that stuff. But yeah, overall I think I gave this book 3 stars because I didn't hate it, but it definitely wasn't like I'm not gonna reread this book ever. And for some reason it really reminded me of Bunny by Mona Awad. So it, like, I feel like it definitely had those like weird vibes from Bunny, even though it was like taken in a different direction. But yeah, I think it was interesting, it just wasn't great. Then next I read The Silver Serpents by Roshni Chokshi. So this is the second book in the Gilded Wolves trilogy, and I have mixed feelings about this book. I think a lot of people have said that they've liked the second book more than the first book, and although I think that the second book delved deeper into the characters in the world, which I did like, I didn't necessarily like it more than I like the Gilded Wolves. But this of course is following Severin and Layla and all the group of characters from the first book, and this is more, whereas the first book was focused on, I guess, introducing the world, and it was a bit of a heist and you know, looking at the character relationships and interactions and stuff, this book's focus is more on this one specific setting and situation. But I feel like for most of the book I was kind of confused. Like, I didn't really understand why they were doing what they were doing or what the purpose of it was. So I feel like the plot was one of the main reasons I didn't love this book as much, even though I loved all the character moments. And I definitely loved how in the first book, obviously without giving away spoilers, if you've read that book, there's a very big thing that happens that leaves the characters with a lot to kind of unpack and deal with. So this book I think did a good job of dealing with how each character is individually dealing with like the grief and the loss and the issues, and kind of how the thing that happened in the first book is impacting all the characters differently. And I also really loved how we got a lot more backstory and a lot more info on each of the characters' past and kind of their feelings and relationships and interactions and all of that. So yeah, I guess character-wise this book was great, but I just feel like the plot was a little weak, so that made me not love it as much as the first. And the next book I read was definitely a standout, maybe even one of my favorites of the year, and that was They Never Learn by Lainey Fargo. So this is an adult psychological thriller, and it was just so exciting and fun and fascinating, and it was like such a fast-paced page turner. Like I couldn't put it down. I think I finished it in like one sitting. But basically this is a book about I think she's a history professor, and she is working at this college, and we very early on find out that she is a kind of a serial killer, and she goes around killing men who have done like bad things. And so, you know, whether that be like rapists or men who've like sexually assaulted or like harassed women, things like that. So she goes around killing these men and making it look like it's a suicide, and until one murder where she gets kind of sloppy and things get out of hand, and now she's kind of in the middle of, you know, this murder investigation, while she's also working with a woman who is a psychologist and is trying to kind of put in a program to deal with these supposed suicides on the college campus, even though we as the readers know that these aren't suicides, you know, this character is killing these men. But yeah, this book was just so fun, and it had a really interesting plot twist in kind of the middle of the book that I really wasn't expecting and I really loved. So yeah, this book was a 5 out of 5 and I highly recommend it. It was just, if you're looking for like a quick, fun, easy read, definitely check this book out. So next I read another really popular thriller book, and that is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. So I have actually read The Maidens, which is his newest release, and I wanted to check this book out because I actually really like The Maidens, but I was kind of like in the middle with this book. I gave it 3 stars, but it's basically about this guy who is a psychologist, and he has specifically tried to come to this I guess rehab facility or clinic or something, and he wants to work with a specific patient because, which was a really big kind of thing in the news, where this young girl named Alisha, yeah, so like there was this big thing in the news where this woman named Alisha had shot her husband, I think 5 times or something, in the face, and ever since then she hasn't spoken, and so nobody has really been able to get through to her or understand why she did what she did, or like how it came to be, and all of that. So basically this guy Theo, the psychologist, he comes to the facility to, like, he specifically wants to work with her and he wants to try to help her, and I think the reason that I felt like in the middle with this book was that I think the plot twist and the kind of shock factor was definitely there. I just didn't really understand the motivations, and I feel like there was some kind of like plot holes and things that, if they were a little more fleshed out by the author, would have made the book more like better as a whole. But yeah, overall, yeah, I gave it 3 stars, and I definitely think The Maidens is better than this book, and yeah, I don't really have much to say about it. I think it was okay. So then next I read Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So this is the first book in the Shades of Magic trilogy, and I really like this book. I think it was really fascinating, and I think the idea behind it was really cool. But it's basically about it's kind of like alternate dimensions of Londons, or like worlds in general, I guess, but each London is like, there's 4 Londons: red, gray, white, and black, and each London has its varying amount of like magic in the city, or like within the people, and they're all like very different. And this guy named Kel is the only one who can travel through the Londons because he has specific magical powers that only he has. Actually, one other character also has it, but he ends up becoming a bit of a smuggler. So he takes, you know, objects from a London and brings them into a different London, and he's not allowed to do that. But one day he accidentally takes this object over to a different London, and it's a very dangerous object, which ends up getting a lot of, you know, there's people after him now, and so he has no idea what this object is or why people are after it. But knowing that he has to keep it safe, he ends up bumping into a girl named Delilah, and both of them are like kind of working together to keep the object safe. So I think overall I did like this book. I think the characters were really strong and really unique, as well as obviously the world and like the Londons and the magic system. I think my only gripe with this book is that it wasn't really fleshed out. Like, I feel like given the expanse of this world and this magic system, there's so many things that, you know, we could have seen and like dived into with this book that we just never were able to do. So I don't know if that was a specific choice by B. Schwab, because obviously there are 2 more books in the trilogy, and I don't know how much more we're gonna get within those books. I have heard that the other 2 books kind of expand on the world and the magic and the characters and all of that, so I am hoping, you know, it gets better. But I gave this book 3.5 stars because it was a really strong start. I just definitely wanted a lot more, so I'm hoping we get that in the next 2 books. Next, I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is another romance book, and it's a very, very popular romance book, and I was left kind of disappointed. I think it was mostly because this book was so hyped and so many people love it that I kind of went into it with really high expectations. I was kind of imagining that it would be another Kiss Quotient type of situation, and although there were a lot of things that I liked about the book, it just didn't stand out as a romance for me. But basically it's about a young woman named Chloe Brown who is dealing with a chronic illness. She has fibromyalgia, and so we see a lot of how this illness affects her daily life, which I really was impressed by. I think a lot of times there are these things called invisible illnesses where obviously like you can't see it as somebody who is interacting with this person because it's not, you know, like a physical disability. But I think the way that Talia Hibbert shows how this character is dealing with this and showing how other people treat her was really important and really well done. But I think the problem with this book was the love interest for me, Redford, I think his name was, and I just feel like given how strong Chloe Brown was as a character in terms of like her development and like the way that she was written, Redford just kind of seemed boring to me. A lot of his backstory and his own struggles I just wasn't super interested in, even though like he was obviously like a really sweet guy and I liked him as a like love interest. I just didn't love him on his own in terms of his struggles, if that makes sense. And then in terms of the romance, I think it was good. I don't think it was, again, anything special or, you know, didn't blow me away, but I am gonna check out Take a Hint, Danny Brown, which is the second book, because another thing that I loved about the book was the kind of sisterly dynamics and the family relationships and stuff like that. So I am excited to see the story of the next sister. And then next I read She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is one of the best books I've ever read. It is probably one of my favorite books of this year. It was just so well done. This is it's like historical fantasy, but it's a reimagining of the rise of the Ming Dynasty, which was one of the dynasties in ancient China. And so yeah, as a historical book, I think this was so interesting, because what I love about, I think when historical fiction, whether it be historical fiction, fantasy, whatever, but when a book can make you really invested, where you know are wanting to find out more about this historical event and like researching and things like that, which I definitely did while reading this book, I think it's just so much fun. I learned so much from this book. Obviously, like, this isn't a history book, but I just think I became really fascinated by what was going on, that I was like, okay, I gotta check out what actually happened. So I think that was really cool. But the number one thing that makes this book so good is the characters. So I would say there's like 2, 3, maybe 4 main characters, and the first maybe third of this book were only focus on one character and her perspective, but then as you go further along you get more characters and you get their perspectives and you get, you know, their trials and tribulations and all of that. So I really love that. I think this book did such a good, it definitely deals a lot with gender identity and gender dysmorphia and kind of the role of women in this historical time. It deals with like relationships and love and things like that. And then obviously this is a part of, it's like historical book dealing with like a dynasty and war and stuff, so it does have a few, I would say, kind of gory violent scenes, but it's not written in a way that is overly dramatic. I think like it's very much, we are in like, let's say, the middle of a battle, but rather than like writing about the actual battle and like the actual fighting, the author chose to write more about how the characters were dealing with those events and how, you know, they like more of the strategy side. So if you're into like political intrigue and strategy and things like that, you'll definitely love this book, but it's not super heavy in terms of like violent fighting scenes. But overall, absolutely love this book. 5 out of 5, so good. So next I read The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris, and I was actually really excited to read this book because it is kind of promoted as Get Out meets The Devil Wears Prada. So just based on that alone, I thought it was going to be like really fast-paced, really interesting, and it is a thriller book, but I feel like it kind of fell short in some places, so I only ended up giving this 3 stars. But the general premise is that it has to do with a black girl who works in the publishing industry, and she is the only black girl in her department basically, until one day a new person is hired and she's another black person. And so she, the main girl, kind of, you know, we see her dealing with being obviously happy that she has more diversity and people who are like her, but then at the same time you kind of see this idea that I feel like a lot of minority and like people of color deal with, in the sense of like when you're the token person and somebody else who is, you know, like you comes into that space, there's this bit of feeling like you're threatened because, you know, generally where these white people are in power, people of color are only brought in for a specific reason. And so when there's only one person and another person's brought in, it kind of makes you feel like you have to be very careful, you know, because only one person of color or minority can be in the space at one time. And so you definitely got those feelings from these characters, but that's besides the point. Basically this book is a thriller, and I feel like the problem was that it didn't really feel very thriller-ish. Like I didn't feel like, you know, the stakes were really higher. I didn't feel like the adrenaline or anticipation with the characters themselves, even though there were some moments of like weird things happening where you were kind of like, okay, like something's up, but I just feel like it didn't completely hit with that. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars, and it was definitely a good book, and it definitely talked about a lot of really important issues, but in terms of a thriller book, I just don't think it was great for that. Next up, I read this Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. So this is actually a really popular book these days, I feel, especially on Book Talk. It's a adult romance, and it is like fake dating, enemies to lovers trope, all of that good stuff. But I didn't like it. I gave it 2, maybe 2.5 stars, and just another example of, you know, really popular romance books that I don't like. But I think one of like my biggest problems is the fact that the characters were not great and the chemistry was not great. But I don't even like this. It just shows how much I didn't like this book, because I don't really remember much about the characters. But basically it's about this girl who is her sister is getting married to her ex's brother back in Spain, and she's working in America. And rather than going back home, you know, alone, basically without a date, she wants to take somebody back with her and pretend that she is happy and secure because she went through a really bad breakup with her ex, who was the groom's brother, who is her ex. And so she doesn't want to look, you know, like she's still reeling from the breakup. So basically this guy at her office overhears, and he kind of volunteers that he will be her fake boyfriend and come to the wedding with her. And so I've definitely heard I read another one of my probably one of my favorite books of the year, and that was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this of course is a new release. It is the same author as The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. So I've only read The Seven Husbands from this author, and that book is amazing. Absolutely love that book. But this book is about the children of one of the husbands from The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And so Mick Riva, one of the husbands, is this really popular musician in this book, but he's a absent father. Like, he doesn't really, you know, have a relationship with his kids. So in this book we follow his 4 kids who have kind of grown up without a father, obviously, but also like they've had to become adults sooner than they should have, because their mother also passed away when they were young, and she had a really hard time dealing with the loss of her husband, as in like he would never be around. But I think what I loved about this book was just how relatable these characters were, especially the main character, Nina. I think her story was just, her development as a character as well as like her story arc was so beautiful and like heartbreaking, but also like hopeful, especially at the end. You know, like she really comes full circle in terms of her growth, where by the end of the book you can really see that her experiences have made an impact on her. So I really loved that. And then for like, if you're looking for like a really nice summer read with like beach vibes and surfing and stuff like that, this does a great job of that. I personally don't surf, I don't even swim, so those were like super important to me, but I just think it was like fun to read about. And then yeah, overall, obviously, you know, this is a Taylor Jenkins Reid book, so the writing is going to be brilliant, and did not disappoint on that. But yeah, I just could like gush about this book constantly. It's so good.